and welcome. Feeling safe in your own home is for the most part a given, but it's not always that way. There are those out there who seek to enter your home for very nefarious reasons, whether it be to take away your valuables or otherwise. So be cautious, make sure your door's locked, and let the darkness take control. I am 19 years old today, and I want to mention that this happened while I was in elementary school, perhaps 3rd or 4th grade. I was definitely a lot younger. At the time, I lived in an apartment complex, and I was on the 2nd floor of the building. I lived with my mother, father, and my cat. The apartment wasn't small, but it wasn't huge either. 2 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, with a living room and kitchen that were connected, and of course, being on the 2nd floor, we had a cute little balcony outside that you could access from the living room. So, I had overheard my mum talking about more than a few break-in attempts that had happened in the other building of the complex. Of course, being a kid, I heard everything. And though I remember most things I heard, they never really stuck with me or were processed in my mind. I was in my own little world. Plus, nothing like that had ever really happened to me before. So, why would it now? Right? I had been in a particularly good mood the day this happened. I had everything go my way, and nothing world-ending like losing my favourite rainbow pencil or breaking my butterfly-painted binder had happened. I went to school, had fun, came home, played with my friends, and even stopped by the complex's office to get some of the candy they always had in a huge dish on the table in front of the entrance. Before I knew it, the day was over, and I was ready for bed. I fell asleep quickly with no worries, hoping I'd have another great day tomorrow. I woke up at about 12:30 or 1 a.m. that night to go to the bathroom and get a drink. I walked into the kitchen, grabbed a juice, and walked into the living room area and looked out the glass door onto the balcony, where I noticed my mother forgot to shut the blinds. I tiptoed towards the door and began to close the blinds when I saw a ladder propped up against the railing of the balcony. I cupped my hands around my eyes and pressed my face up to the window so that I could make sure I was actually seeing what I thought I saw. I was right. There it was, the top of a ladder. I was about to go and wake my mum and ask her where the ladder came from, when I saw a hand reach up the last bar of the ladder. I didn't necessarily know that whoever's that hand belonged to was trying to break into my house, but I had the most gut-wrenching feeling that they weren't supposed to be climbing up my balcony at this time, or any time for that matter. I felt like I had to act fast, like by the time I went and got my mother, they would already be prepared to hurt me and my parents. I did the only thing I could do to scare them off. I flipped the balcony light off and back on again. Before I even had time to flick the light again, I heard the ladder fold back up and saw about 4 or 5 guys take off across the parking lot that my balcony overlooked. Then I saw something that horrified me. They were all carrying bats and crowbars, and one of them even had what looked like a pistol in his hand. I thought about running and telling my mum, and I honestly didn't know why I didn't. I ran back into my room and hid under the covers and stayed awake for hours, listening for anything that might be something else trying to break in, and I eventually, somehow, fell asleep. I didn't tell my mother until years later for some reason, and I haven't had a break-in experience since. That's it though. Thanks to everyone who took the time to hear this, and to the guys who tried to break into my apartment. Let's not meet. A few years back, I lived in an apartment complex. It wasn't in a bad part of town. I even lucked out, somehow managing to move into the same building as a handful of friends of mine. I thought it was awesome. A couple of months after living there, I noticed things missing. It was never anything big, like my laptop or Xbox, but my iPod and camera, and a couple of other small things vanished. I knew I just left them out in the open on the counter, but then they were gone. I figured I just misplaced them because, again, they were small items. A few times I'd get ready to leave, and my bottom lock would be locked. Now personally, I don't put much stock into doorknob locks. They've always seemed really flimsy to me, and not worth the effort, so I only ever used my deadbolt. When people would come over, I'd close the door behind them and automatically lock the deadbolt. It was a reflex. Even when I was home alone, the door was locked, but never the knob. I even felt safer using it because the deadbolt had no keyhole on the outside of the door for someone to pick. 3 times the doorknob was locked when I went to leave the house, and even though I never used it, I rationalized that sure, I probably did lock it myself. I mean, what else could it be? One day, after living there for about 7 months, I am sitting in my living room, and I hear some shuffling by my front door. Since my apartment was a 1-bedroom, and fairly small, I could hear it easily. I got up and moved closer, standing maybe 4 feet away from it. My heart sank as I watched my doorknob twist ever so slowly. It turned, then the door pushed in, stopped by my deadbolt. At an antagonizingly slow pace, the person on the other side pulled it closed. The door softly clicked, and I watched and listened as they slid a key into my lock and locked the doorknob. I didn't know what to do. Have you ever seen something that restarts your brain? It was so unfathomable that you can't just take in the information. That's what this was. I wish I could say I snuck up to the door and banged against it, scaring the crap out of whoever was on the other side. But I didn't. I didn't do anything, because my brain couldn't actually comprehend that someone with a key was trying to get into my apartment while I was home. The only thing that saved me was my deadbolt. And before anyone says it was a friend or my husband with a spare, no. I had the only 2 copies, I thought. Because my husband was deployed. Not even family had a spare. Everything snapped into place after that. Someone had been sneaking into my apartment and stealing stuff, and doing God knows what while I was gone, and then relocking the door behind me. And they'd attempted to do it while I was there, locking my doorknob. I mean, how many times had they been in my apartment when I wasn't home? There's no way for me to know for sure, because like I said before, I can't lock the deadbolt from the outside. Logically, I knew it had to be someone who worked in the office, a maintenance man most likely. But since I didn't look through the peephole, I couldn't find out which of the 4 guys who worked there it was. About 6 months after moving out, a friend who still lived there told me that all of the maintenance men had been fired because all of them were reported creeping around apartments and likely suspected of stealing. While this isn't outright terrifying like some of these other stories, it's still scary, at least to me. And it's another reminder to lock your doors, even when you're home. When I was a kid, my brother and I would get stuck with babysitting the neighbor's kid. His name was Alex. Alex was really fond of my Lego set that I had in the corner of my room, facing the window. He would play for hours, staying preoccupied, while my brother and I would play video games in the living room. So one night when I fell asleep on the couch while babysitting, my brother came by to me and said, "Alex is under your bed shaking." I asked, "What's wrong with him?" My brother told me to follow him to the room and try to talk him back out from under the bed. I go inside and find him on the verge of tears as he's trembling profusely under my bed. I asked him, "What's wrong? Why are you under there?" He whimpered, "Him," while looking at the sliding closet. As I walked towards the bed in order to help him out, he ran. He ran all the way back over to his house and waited on his front steps until his parents got home. Now, my parents were out to dinner with his, and he explained the whole story in detail to both his parents and mine. His explanation sent shivers down my spine when my brother and I left the house to meet up with his parents and find out what happened. My mum told me that Alex was playing with my Legos and heard a slight murmur from my closet, something that resembled a faint vocalization of, "Come here." He said that he looked behind him and noticed the closet had a slight opening with a light peering out from my lamp. He stared at the crack until he saw an eyelid open. He told us there was a man in my closet, and Alex then hid under the bed and he gave out a slight yelp, which attracted my brother's attention. My family rushes back to my house, and in horror, we find my closet door rocked open and a few things missing. My window had been left open when it was previously closed. A few things had been knocked over which hadn't previously been touched. We still didn't know what force we were reckoning with after that event. Thank God that nothing more severe happened. This story goes back 3 months or so. For background, my wife and I live in a gated community in the city of Chicago. Because of this, we see very few people in our neighborhood outside of fellow homeowners. We have an 8-year-old husky/German Shepherd mix who thinks he's more lapdog than guard dog. The only time he barks is at the 2 neighbors' dogs every day at 7:30 a.m., 1 p.m. and 10 p.m. as they walk out and back in the neighborhood. For whatever reason, he strongly dislikes those 2 dogs and angrily barks at them, despite years of us trying to get him to stop. Outside seeing those dogs, he's the most calm and friendly dog out there. Every so often, our dog will see or hear the occasional raccoon or possum on our back deck, and do a more excited and upbeat bark, the kind where he wants us to let him out to go snag some fresh city pest. This may happen 2 or 3 times a year. This brings us to August or September. I am awoken by my dog barking at the back door, and it does not sound like a familiar bark of his. This barking continues and becomes more intense. It has an urgency and a sound of peril I have not heard before from him. I look at my clock, and it's about 2:30 a.m. This is incredibly abnormal, and I begin to feel very uneasy. Our bedroom faces the back of our house, so I go to the window and glance out, down onto the deck. Living in the city, it's never fully dark out. This, combined with the glow from our kitchen under-cabinet lights we leave on as night lights, allow me to see a hooded man standing at my back door. His hands are at his sides, and he's staring into my house, seemingly oblivious to the sounds of my dog, who is clearly threatened by him. He's not leaning towards the door, straining to see what might be inside, as if trying to decide whether we're worth robbing. He's just standing there erect, with his hands straight down his sides. I grab my phone and go to the home app to turn on my outdoor string lights hung above the deck, which I have on a smart outlet. The lights come on, and the hooded man startles. He looks around to his sides and behind him, then runs off through my neighbor's yard, never to be seen again. This happened when I was about 12 to 13. During this time, my brother was diagnosed with cancer, so my mum was often at the hospital with him. She would randomly come home during the day to do laundry, pick up stuff, eat, and the like. At this time, my mother, brother, and I were also living at my grandparents' house. My grandparents have a 2-story house with a basement. There is a front door, and to the left, a staircase leading downstairs. The basement had 2 bedrooms, a living room, and a bathroom. When you entered the basement, you were immediately in the living room, which is where my mother slept. Then, you would go down a hall and find my room halfway down the hall, across from the bathroom, and my brother's room at the end of the hall. Sorry for the context. Anyway, one day I was extremely ill and stayed home sick. Both of my grandparents were at work, and my mother was at the hospital with my brother. I was laying in bed, sleeping, when I was woken up by a really loud stomping coming from upstairs. I assumed it was my mum, just coming home to get stuff, and was pissed she was running around like a lunatic. I sat up in bed to go upstairs to yell at her, but when I sat up, it felt like my brain had a heartbeat and was beating against my skull. So I just laid back down and went back to sleep. I'm not sure if this next part actually happened, or if I just think it did because I was delusional from a fever. I swear, I kept hearing someone coming down the stairs, as our stairs were quite noisy. At the time, I slept with the TV in my room on, so I thought the people/person kept hearing the TV and got freaked out. So I'd say maybe half an hour to an hour later, I woke up, forgetting the whole thing happened, and called my mum. She tells me to go upstairs and get some Dayquil to help me feel better. So I open my door, leaning upstairs, and it's just freezing. So I stop for a minute and think, that's weird. I slowly walk up my stairs, and my door is kicked wide open, and there's stuff everywhere. I immediately ran back downstairs and tried calling my mum, who of course didn't answer. So I call my grandma instead, and she tells me that I need to call the police. I call the police, and they tell me to go wait on the driveway. So I do. And of course, as soon as the cops and I are talking, the school bus, taking all the people I went to school with, passed right by my house. As soon as my grandma got home, she gave me the biggest hug, and I just lost it. I think it was the first time since I pieced it all together I finally felt safe again. They ended up taking a portable DVD player, a Canon camera, and worst of all my great-grandmother's jewellery who had just passed away. I often think about what would have happened if I'd gone upstairs, and I don't think it would have been anything good. This happened maybe 6 years ago now. I had just graduated college and was working at a little ad agency in my city. I was living in a cramped 1-bedroom apartment with my unemployed girlfriend and my unemployed cat. It was a little 6-story building, with maybe 20 apartments total just off Main Street. There was no security guard at the entrance of the building, but an automatically locking door that required a key code to enter. The 4th floor was home to a few students and couples, and my apartment was right next to a vacant studio, making it pretty quiet most of the time. After a long night in the office the night before, I didn't feel up for going into work, so I called out and turned off my alarm. I cuddled up to my girlfriend in hopes of sleeping till noon. At around 10 a.m, pounding on my front door woke both of us up, and I went to check it out. "Just a minute," I yelled, as I threw on a shirt and sweatpants, expecting a surprise visit from the maintenance man or something. In my groggy state, I couldn't really tell that anything was off, but I peeked through the peephole and didn't see anyone. Opening the door felt different somehow, and I immediately noticed a large depression in the wall 2 to 3 feet from my door. Looking down, I could see shards of wood that had broken free from the casing around the door, and I noticed the wood beginning to separate at the hinges. The hair on the back of my neck raised as I pieced together the scene. Someone had been trying to kick my door down and was pressing themselves against the wall for support. It scared us both for a while, and we slid a couch in front of the door before bed each night for a few months after that. I'm not sure what their intentions were that day, and we moved soon after. But I could never stop questioning what would have happened if they had heard my girlfriend's voice instead of mine. I live with my family in an extremely old house in the British countryside. For some background, it's your typical old English farmhouse. There's a big front door in the middle, and to your left you have your kitchen, and to your right your family room, with all the bedrooms upstairs. It was quite a nice space, and we had other buildings surrounding us that had been converted into spaces for us to use as children, that used to house pigs and other animals. However, those had been moved further afield, so that we could enjoy our privacy and not have to worry about any animals while we were just focusing at home. That's besides the point though. This happened about 15 years ago, when I still lived with my family. I was the eldest of 4 girls, and we were all very content to sleep one night. It was your standard evening. All of us had gone to bed, and my parents were probably downstairs watching TV. I'm quite a light sleeper, and would always hear when they came up the stairs, and just like every night, I did this time as well. I found it a bit harder to go to sleep than usual. Something was pressing on my mind, so I told myself I needed to go grab a drink of water. I always made sure to go down the stairs carefully. Being a very old house, creaks are prevalent, and you have to know where to step exactly in order to make minimal to no sound. I got downstairs and just stared into the darkness through the kitchen window, while slowly taking sips of my water, contemplating and thinking about what I had to do tomorrow at school. I'm being very absent-minded, and I'm not really super tired, so I was just waiting for the water to hopefully make me feel a bit full, and like I needed to go back to sleep. Just as I'm staring out though, do I notice something? It's also worth mentioning at this point that no lights were on in the house, as we tried to be as energy efficient as possible, and it was a fairly bright moon outside, so it wasn't necessary in order for me to see where I was going in the kitchen. I see a figure begin to approach from the garden. Now, I also need to point out, we live in the middle of nowhere, with no other houses around. I think the closest might be about a mile away, so very isolated. We don't get along well with our neighbours, if you can even call them neighbours at that distance, so it was unlikely to be them. This person is making their way with haste towards the house, and I wonder what they want. I wait to see if they're even going to come to the house, or go up our driveway into the road, before I make a decision to wake up my mum, because I know she'll be pissed. I stand there in the dark, and the person arrives at the door, studying it, and walks around the house a little, looking at the windows and looking at the back door. He can't see me. At least I don't think he can. He hasn't noticed me at all. I didn't think I was standing somewhere particularly dark, and yet here I am, completely unnoticed. I don't really know what to do. Then he comes back around to the front door, and he pulls something off his back. It's black, shiny, and he starts wedging it in. At that moment it all clicks. It's a crowbar, but I can't move. I'm frozen to my spot. He makes quick work of the door, gets in, and even though it's made a fair amount of noise, none of my family have woken up or done anything about it. He goes into the hallway, and I can no longer see him, and am paralyzed with fear, whether to shout for them to wake up, whether to run and hide in a safe spot and hope that he doesn't venture upstairs, or to do something reckless and announce my presence in the hopes that I scare him off. I choose option 4 and remain glued to the ground, paralyzed with fear and unable to move. Just as I start to get brave, I think the best thing to do would be to let him know I'm there and to hopefully scare him off. We have all of our kitchen knives in holders, so I just grab 2 that are conveniently in the slots and start approaching the door silently. I can see that he's made his way into our lounge, so I start approaching it ever so quietly, making sure to step where the creaks won't be heard, in order to jump scare him, in the hopes that he leaves out of fear. I get right to the door and hide next to the wall, waiting for the opportune moment. He's currently looking under the sofa and around our bookshelves, in hopes to find something valuable, I suppose. I stand there, panic-stricken, waiting for the right moment, when I see something that I can't explain. He's looking underneath the sofa. If he would have turned his head any more, he would have probably seen me, when a book flies off the shelf and lands to the floor with a thud. He visibly jumps, turns around, and another book flies off the shelf and lands on the floor. I wasn't really sure what I was seeing. Not only was there a strange man in my house, but now books are flying off the shelves too? One more book comes down and lands right between his legs. It's not before long that he grabs his bag and runs as quickly as he can out of the house. I don't even think he noticed me as he left, as I took a few steps back in anticipation for him leaving. He runs out, and the loud stomping woke up my mum. She comes bolting down, shotgun in hand, ready to shout at someone. She sees the open door, and in the moonlight, someone running through the field. She turns to me, turns to the man, and congratulates me on scaring him off, and asks what happened. I explain how I saw him coming, was frightened, then he made entry, and when he was just looking around our lounge, did books start flinging themselves from the bookshelf, and that scared him off without me even having to announce my presence. My mother says that I should always shout, always make noise before they enter, to scare them off, and to tell her and my dad as the ever bigger priority. We call the police, and of course, nothing comes of it. I never find out who he was. But one burning question has always been left in my head. What happened? Was the house protecting itself? Is our house haunted? None of us had ever experienced anything remotely paranormal in the house, so I'm not really sure why, at that moment in time, did the house suddenly decide to develop a poltergeist that decided to leave just as quickly as well. Some things I'll never know the answer to, but I'm glad the house fought back, or whatever it was, to protect us from that home invader. I had awesome parents who let me sleep in the living room on weekend nights when I was very young, because my sister was a light sleeper and I could lay awake until dawn. But of course, I always end up sleeping on the couch because Nick at night made me tired. So one night, I wake up to this prickly feeling, like an insect, just bolted into a sitting position, and I started staring out the window. We live in rural Georgia, so you can imagine the magnitude of trees in perfect light cast from the moon. I see a silhouette of someone in this tree. The family dog dashes to the window and is snarling into the glass. Terrified, I run into my parents' room and try to explain to my parents that there is a strange person outside. Dad grabs something defensive and darts outside with the dog to beat the wax off the hothead. I tremble in Mama's arms until Dad comes home and says he saw no one and goes to bed. I decide to sleep in my regular bed. I fill in my sister as to what happened. Dad is making regular sounds in the house with a cup of coffee, and we are still, and I finally think that I can sleep. Nope. I notice the man outside my window. From what I can see in the moonlight, he gives me a hush signal and runs away. Just turns around and runs in a straight line away. I swear, I couldn't stop crying for what felt like hours. There were definitely a lot of sketchy things about the neighborhood I lived in. For instance, the previous resident of the house, which was next to mine, had died from overdosing on drugs. A meth house burnt down the road last year, and about 2 months ago, there was a shooting down the road at 2 a.m. And a week before, there was an attempted break-in at one of our neighbors. For some background, I was in a temporary house with my cousin and his wife and baby. I had my own little experience, but you'd need to know what his wife experienced to make it all the more creepier. So this starts off nearly a month ago, while me and my cousin were at work. His wife heard a knocking on the front door and assumed it was just my stepdad, who usually comes over by his voice. He has a key to the house, so just decides to let him open the key by himself. But he just kept knocking and asking if anyone was home. She started to get a bit worried and called my stepdad to see if it was him. It wasn't. He says our address and then states he's from Apple trying to deliver a package. The thing is, the closest Apple store is about an hour and a half away, and we hadn't ordered anything. He leaves after about 20 minutes, and then my stepdad comes over and takes her to his house. He suspected our neighbors were being watched by robbers, thinking about breaking in soon. But imagine if she'd decided to open the door alone with a baby. Nothing else happens, but we're still on guard. Fast forward to this week. My cousin's family temporary stay is over, and they leave. So I'm home alone that day. I'm moving my things to my parents for now. I'm taking out some Amazon boxes to the garbage, and decide, with that sketchy encounter, I should probably scratch out my information on the box with my pocket knife. I flip open and start, but I hear a rustling in the woods. I look for a second, expecting nothing more than a squirrel or a loose dog that's always coming around. But I see a person in a white hoodie from what I guess would be about 25 feet away. The rustling stops, and I can't see them anymore due to the dense trees. I'm stunned for a few seconds. I'm the only one there, and I only have a pocket knife. I don't even run inside for some reason, I just casually walk. Once I get inside, I stand in the kitchen, maybe being too scared to move. I think, what should I do? Call the cops? Call one of my parents? I just decide to call my stepdad, who luckily for me, was already on the way to the house to collect some stuff. He arrives 10 minutes later and looks around and doesn't find anything or anyone. I leave to work with all my valuables already in the car before this happened, and I'm definitely not going back alone for the rest of my things. Now I'm glad we're all out of that place. I'm hoping they don't decide to break in while nobody's home, but there really is nothing of value left, unless they want to steal my leftover clothes and blankets. The thought of having to live in fear because some scum want to try and steal our stuff irritates me. I hope we never meet. We grew up in a small Midwestern factory town. Snowy, freezing winters and sweltering hot summers. My parents, mother and stepdad barely made ends meet. We moved from trailer home to cramped apartment multiple times over. When I was in 4th grade, my family finally bought a house. Not just any house, an enormous house. The only problem was that the house was split into a triplex, meaning 3 families could live there in separate quarters. Since we were still dirt poor, my parents, of course, had to rent out 2 of the 3. This meant our family of 6 lived in a 2-bedroom shack section of the home. The 2nd bedroom was really just a living room off the kitchen, which I shared with my sister and youngest brother. The door to our home was in the kitchen. My dog Pepe was a natural brawn protector. He weighed about 10 pounds, but he didn't let anything past his sight without an alert. It's 3 a.m. on a 100-degree August night with 0 air conditioning, windows with too many holes in the screens to leave open, as Midwest equals mosquitoes. Fans are running on full blast throughout the space, and I wake up to Pepe barking furiously at the end of my bed. At first, I just stared at him and asked him to be quiet, figuring that he had heard a noise from one of the neighbors. Then I hear a shuffle from the kitchen. I turned left and started to try and focus past the bright lights over the kitchen sink. Then I saw something move slightly, and upon meeting each other's gaze, they froze. There were 2 men standing in the kitchen. I will never forget their faces to this day. We just stared at each other for what felt like minutes. Pepe didn't back down, but he also wasn't about to leave his post at the end of my bed. We had saved Pepe from an abusive home earlier that year in the freezing winter. He took his job pretty seriously. His bark was so loud, I couldn't even think to scream. My naked mother suddenly flies out of the bedroom next to us, screaming at the 2 men. All that I remember is her screaming, confrontation, and her chest swinging wildly in the bright glare from the kitchen light. The tallest man, at least 6'5", quietly looks at her and says, "Wrong house. Connects eyes with me," and they both turn and exit, never to be seen again. My parents decided after that we should start locking our door at night. They justified the men by saying they were probably looking for the neighbors. They didn't call the police. I was probably 7 or 8 years old. As a sheer coincidence one night, my older sister's bed broke. I had a double bed, so my parents told us we had to share for the night. No big deal. Probably at around 2 a.m, my sister shakes me awake, saying she needed to go to the bathroom. I told her to go, and said something about, "Why did you wake me up?" She insisted that I go with her to watch the door. That was something we did when we were much younger and afraid of monsters. I again just told her to go and leave me alone. She started to physically drag me from the bed, so I finally caved in and walked with her, and I was pretty much sleepwalking and only woke up when I noticed she was walking right past the bathroom. I asked her where she was going, and she said, to Mum and Dad's room. Now I'm confused. We get to my Mum and Dad's bed, and she starts to wake up Mum. Mum was a super heavy sleeper, so it wasn't surprising when Dad woke up first, slightly annoyed. He asked her what was wrong, and very quietly, nonchalantly, she says that someone crawled into bed with us. Dad sat up and had to ask what she meant, and she said, "Someone crawled into bed with us, Dad. I thought it was you, but it didn't smell like you." Dad immediately jumps up, grabs the revolver he kept under the bed, and heads to my room. I thought my sister was lying, until my dad flipped the light in my room on, and sure enough, there was a man laying in my bed. That woke me up. Dad put the barrel to his forehead and asked, "What the hell do you think you're doing in my son's bed? You better think real good about what you say next." The guy was clearly confused and looked like he was about to crap himself. He rubbed his eyes and started swearing to himself. By now my mother had called the cops and the sirens were getting closer. Dad tells the guy to get up and to walk to the kitchen, all while at gunpoint. The cops arrest him and haul him away. Apparently, what happened was he was a high schooler who had attended a party a few blocks away. He got drunk and started walking to his grandma's house. Her house was north, and he went south. He got to our house thinking it was hers, tried the locks, and got mad, thinking she had locked him out. He punched out the window in the back door, unlocked it from the inside, and made his way to his room to sleep it off. Thankfully, my parents were pretty cool and didn't crucify the kid. They made him pay for the door and requested he attend rehab, which he did. Still, not a great way to wake up. This incident happened at my dad's house a couple of years ago. Somewhat relevant to the story, my parents are still married, but live apart because of their work situations. They often see each other on weekends. My dad lives in a town of about 25,000 people, and it's pretty blue-collar for the most part. His house is in the downtown area, which has been regentrified, so it's not a bad area to live in. But it's also just a stone's throw away from the worst part of town. My dad's house is also directly across the street from the main entrance to a university. So there is a university secure checkpoint just a few stops away from his front door that is manned by real police officers 24/7. My dad's house is older and has a detached garage in the back. His backyard is surrounded by a brick wall with 2 wrought iron gates, neither of which have a lock on them, since everyone usually enters through the back door. It's really just inconvenient to have a padlock on the back gates that you constantly have to lock and unlock come rain or shine. The garage door can only be opened using a key code. Inside the back gate, on the side of the garage, is a small crawl-through space that was covered with a board at the time. We have no idea why this little weird space was put there, unless it once housed an AC unit for the previous owner's workshop in the garage. One weekend, my mum arrived and visited, and was looking through the garage for some of her things she had stored there. She was particularly looking for a large floral duffel bag where she stored her sewing machine. Her sewing machine was still in the garage, but the floral duffel was nowhere to be found. She asked my dad where it was, assuming that he had used it as a suitcase, since he does often travel overnight occasionally for work. He told her that he hadn't touched it, and that it should still be in the garage where she left it. They both shrug it off, assuming that one of them had misplaced it and forgotten where it was. Fast forward a couple of weeks later. My mother is back to visit my dad, and I'm also there with my daughter. My dad walks out the back door one morning and notices the board on the little crawl-through space was damaged, as if someone had been kicking it in. He decided to go into the garage to investigate. Soon after, he called my mum and I into the garage to see what he had found. There was a piece of rolled-up newspaper that was charred black on one end. Someone had opened the back gate at night, kicked in the board over the crawl-through space, and lit a piece of newspaper on fire to use as a torch, as they glanced around the garage for, presumably, anything valuable. And the freaky part, they did all of this within 100 meters of a police security checkpoint, while all four of us were sleeping just outside the back door. And we were lucky they didn't find the spare house key hung on a nail inside the garage. My dad put two and two together and realized that this was probably the burglar's second entrance into the garage. A couple of weeks before, when my mum's floral duffel bag disappeared, my dad had noticed that the board covering the crawl-through space seemed loose, and had taken steps to tack it from the inside. He assumed that the burglar originally entered through the same space and stole the duffel bag, either planning to use it to store items that he would steal from other houses, or use it upon his return to my dad's garage a couple of weeks later to gather items of value. Perhaps he was spooked the first time and ran off. After the second incident, my dad had thicker boards nailed to the inside and outside of the crawl space. It remained untouched ever since, but to this day, my mum always thinks twice before opening that garage door when it's dark out, and my dad keeps a baseball bat right next to the back door. We're just glad the guy's makeshift newspaper torch didn't provide him enough light to find the spare house key and enter while we were asleep in our beds that night. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's video. A huge and massive special thank you to my incredible patrons for supporting me on Patreon. Your help makes a huge difference, and I really appreciate it. If you would like your name on screen, as well as a few fancy perks on Reddit and Discord, feel free to check out my Patreon. Which you'll be able to find in the description, and it makes a huge difference to me. And even if you don't, thanks for listening about it. If you enjoyed the video, it'd be pretty cool to drop a like and leave a comment with your thoughts, as that always helps. And if you're new here, why not subscribe and press the little bell icon to be notified each time I post nightly spooks. If there's a story that you would like read, feel free to post it to my Reddit, or alternatively send it to my email. Just please be sure to include plenty of detail, good grammar and punctuation to ensure your story will be selected. But anyway, for now guys, it's time for me to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.
Jack Dorsey did say, Steven, you started it. I began to start the jokes by name. I did. It is my fault. I take full responsibility. Raping her name. Raping vagina good. The name. Let's please don't get. Are you trying to get me put in jail like the social media deplatform jail? Please don't do this. My point is with Jack Dorsey. Cut it out then. Are we live? Jack Dorsey said, yeah, as it relates to sort of political pressures, external political pressures. I don't know the exact quote. I remember him saying, yeah, the left wants us to do more. The left wants us to censor people more, and the right wants less. He admitted that. And we've talked about that on the show for a long time. I know you have. The left demands less transparency. The left demands less truth, whereas conservatives of the right, libertarians, all everyone in the world demands more. They used to try and deny that. It seems as though now they're not even concerned with. No, I agree. So why do you think they're just openly, we're going to censor everybody? I don't think that they're openly saying we're going to censor everybody. They try to sort of obfuscate and pass off as well. You know, no. They denied it for a while. But if you read like the London Guardian or even Time Magazine or these articles, they're like, we want all of it off. They just hear it and they go, well, we got rid of Jones, we will get rid of Crowder and all of it. They're listing your name. They're saying we want them off air. I know Twitter's not open about that, but Facebook and YouTube are at least trying to act as though that's not the case. But I know Twitter's pretty open about the fact they want to use it as a... You're right. The future British Prime Minister is saying he wants Tommy Robinson taken off YouTube or he'll use governmental powers to shut down YouTube. So I agree. As bad as Google's been, it's not the worst. So let me ask you this. Who gets the prize for it? Who is the biggest censor on the internet? Well, you know, it's an interesting question because I was going to ask you this question immediately afterward. Right now, who do I think is the biggest force team? Who do I think has the most power? Yes, I would say I think Google and Facebook, because they have both Google and YouTube, then probably Facebook and Twitter is further on down that list. That's why when we've talked about sort of taking legal action, they're not at the front of our queue because they pretty much admitted they want to be a tool for social change. But this is interesting, as you're a libertarian, I've talked about this, a few different guests. What do you think the solution is as a small government libertarian? Do you think that the government should step in and regulate them as public utilities? Because as you just talked about, right, that's a slippery slope. In the UK, the government wants to pressure YouTube to take Tommy Robinson off. But what's the solution here? I'm really glad you raised that nuanced point, Mr. Crowder. If we don't regulate the internet with necessary evil, with a prohibition, like the Second Amendment says you will not infringe. The First Amendment says you will not infringe. It's not a government power taking something away. It's a guarantor saying that you have immunity as a citizen to defend yourself. You have immunity to have free speech. This is sacrosanct. This is what we worship. This is who we are. This is what makes us who we are. And so, yes, I don't like government being involved. I'm a libertarian like you. But then, when the EU and the UK and government says we're going to use government power to censor and shut everybody down, who's a nationalist, who's a Brexiter, who's a conservative, who's pro-military, who's pro-family, who's capitalist, then you've got to have government come in and say, we're guaranteeing these basic rights like our current law does on the internet. It's just being ignored. And so the internet needs to go back to where it was, where the internet doesn't censor. These companies don't censor unless somebody's violating law clearly and they get a DMCA takedown order. We have a good orderly system to do this. They've just been ignoring that the last 2.5 years since Hillary Clinton lost the election. They've panicked. They're doing this. So I'm not for regulation. But instead, when we stand down, it creates a vacuum where all these regulators come in. We let the EU and the UK and the Chinese governments praising U.S. companies for censoring. So that vacuum, because we're like, we're conservatives, Heritage Foundation, these are private companies, they'll do whatever they want. Well, now we just gave in to the vacuum of all these other very rapacious forces. Here's what I've proposed, at least as a step. Tell me if you agree with this or not. I think that what we need to do is have some transparency. Again, we've talked about conservatives or libertarians, we demand transparency. I think that YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and any other social media platforms, they need to publicly declare whether they see themselves as publishers or as open platforms that they do not censor. If they say, hey, we're private publishers, like a BuzzFeed, like a HuffPo, then we say, okay, then you're no longer a social media platform. Fine, let's be honest about it. Now we need to see some transparency. If they say, you show you've done your research. That's the federal and international law. Right. Under the subsection, they have liability protection. A newspaper or TV station doesn't. Right. But because they have third-party posting, they have liability protection. They're not supposed to be a publisher. So the minute they engage in publisher control, they now lose their immunity. Right. So do you think that probably the most important first step would be for them to have to formally
unilaterally declare whether they are a neutral platform or publisher, because then we can hold them to their own standards.
Yes, I agree. If they won't back off and stop being authoritarian censors, I'd rather them use the immunity as a third. I mean, it's not their fault if I'm on a telephone saying something or I'm on Facebook.
Exactly.
And once it's criminal, they take it down. So I'd rather them revert to what greater minds in the free market and those that built the internet came up with and worked so great instead of the Chinese model. I'd rather them back off. But yes, you're right, Stephen. If they will not stop, then we have to strip them of their immunity.
Okay. Final question here. Going in a different direction. We have to get going. A lot of talk, obviously, since you were on Joe Rogan, about you mentioned the clockwork elves. And this was very entertaining once Eddie Bravo came in, and it seemed as though there were some miscommunications, but it was a lot of fun to watch. Here's one thing that I do want to clarify. You talked about these sort of elven figures, let's say. It seemed like you were trying to stress, I noticed this, that you weren't talking about aliens, extraterrestrials, or vampires, but am I wrong in saying a more biblically based interpretation of kind of demonic apparitions? That's what you were trying to communicate? Because I did find that interesting. I don't think a lot of people who aren't familiar with you, associate you with your more faith-based worldview.
Exactly. If people want to find out what I really believe, Infowars.com, Newswars.com, they can hear it in this context. I've never seen aliens. I'm not into UFOs. I don't go to UFO conferences. I'm not that guy. I never really covered the lizard people. I've had David Icke on. Studying globalists and studying what they're into, they are into the occult. Just like every major ancient religion thought they were conjuring creatures, they were getting data from beyond the veil. And so when you read the Bible about one world government, mark of the beast, and there'll be humans conjuring demons, and demons will be settlers on the earth. And then you study San Francisco and the liberals. They're taking DMT, they're taking ayahuasca, and they're having group events with 20, 30, 50, 100 people. And by the way, Joe Rogan said this on air. We never got there fully, but we had an hour and a half conversation before we went live. He says, "Listen, you're thinking about clockwork elves." He goes, "I take DMT all the time." He goes, "We have basically group experiences. We're talking to these aliens, and they look like little elves." And I'm like, "Well, listen, I'm not going to take that because that scares me. Okay, all I know is the Bible describes it. You can look at black magic books written 1,000 years ago, and it shows the magician conjures a little thing, a little gray alien. So yes, the demons that we hear about in modern culture, or the aliens we hear about in modern culture, are the demons. And so it fits in perfectly. Like the Aztecs would sacrifice thousands of people a day sometimes, because they believed it opened up a portal for gods to tell them things. So it's like chumming the ocean for sharks to come. These lower entities, these demons, want blood of children. Historically, whether they're real or not, I'm saying the elites are obsessed with it. Yes, it's far out. Yes, it's crazy, but this is what they believe, and they believe killing innocents or doing horrible things brings in these entities that then give them knowledge.
Hey, well, Alex, since this is a pre-tape because I'm so sick, can you pause real quick, and we'll do this as an after the bell, and upload this as another segment, because I'd like to get into this deeper, but we do have to hit the clock here.
Sure, I'll go as long as you want. I love the old show.
Infowars.com. Please, did I say Infowars.com? What was the other?
Newswars.com.
Newswars.com. All right, all these places.
They don't censor Newswars as much.
We will be back after this to close on the show, and this will be uploaded at a later date, because Alex and I are going to go into a little bit of a rabbit hole here. Hold on, we'll be right back. Thanks to Alex.
Mortis Media.
Good evening all, and welcome. Feeling safe in your own home is for the most part a given, but it's not always that way. There are those out there who seek to enter your home for very nefarious reasons, whether it be to take away your valuables or otherwise. So be cautious, make sure your door's locked, and let the darkness take control. I am 19 years old today, and I want to mention that this happened while I was in elementary school, perhaps 3rd or 4th grade. I was definitely a lot younger. At the time, I lived in an apartment complex, and I was on the 2nd floor of the building. I lived with my mother, father, and my cat. The apartment wasn't small, but it wasn't huge either. 2 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, with a living room and kitchen that were connected, and of course, being on the 2nd floor, we had a cute little balcony outside that you could access from the living room. So, I had overheard my mum talking about more than a few break-in attempts that had happened in the other building of the complex. Of course, being a kid, I heard everything. And though I remember most things I heard, they never really stuck with me or were processed in my mind. I was in my own little world. Plus, nothing like that had ever really happened to me before. So, why would it now? Right? I had been in a particularly good mood the day this happened. I had everything go my way, and nothing world ending like losing losing my favorite rainbow pencil or breaking my butterfly paint binder had happened. I went to school, had fun, came home, played with my friends, and even stopped by the complex's office to get some of the candy they always had in a huge dish on the table in front of the entrance. Before I knew it, the day was over, and I was ready for bed. I fell asleep quickly with no worries, hoping I'd have another great day tomorrow. I woke up at about 12:30 or 1 a.m. that night to go to the bathroom and get a drink. I walked into the kitchen, grabbed a juice, and walked into the living room area and looked up the glass door onto the balcony, where I noticed my mother forgot to shut the blinds. I tiptoed towards the door and began to close the blinds when I saw a ladder propped up against the railing of the balcony. I cupped my hands around my eyes and pressed my face up to the window so that I could make sure I was actually seeing what I thought I saw. I was right. There it was, the top of a ladder. I was about to go and wake my mum and ask her where the ladder came from, when I saw a hand reach up the last bar of the ladder. I didn't necessarily know that whoever's that hand belonged to was trying to break into my house, but I had the most gut-wrenching feeling that they weren't supposed to be climbing up my balcony at this time, or any time for that matter. I felt like I had to act fast. Like by the time I went and got my mother, they would already be prepared to hurt me and my parents. I did the only thing I could do to scare them off. I flipped the balcony light off and back on again. Before I even had time to flip the light on, I heard the ladder fold back up and saw about 4 or 5 guys take off across the parking lot at my balcony. Then I saw something that horrified me. They were all carrying bats and crowbars, and one of them even had what looked like a pistol in his hand. I thought about running and telling them why, and I honestly didn't know why I didn't. I ran back into my room, hid under the covers, and stayed awake for hours, listening for anything that might be something else trying to break in. And I eventually, somehow, fell asleep. I didn't tell my mother until years later for some reason, and I haven't had a break-in experience since. That's it though. Thanks to everyone who took the time to hear this, and to the guys who tried to break into my apartment. Let's not. A few years ago, I lived in an apartment complex. It wasn't in a bad part of town. I even lucked out, somehow managing to move into the same building as a handful of friends of mine. I thought it was awesome. A couple of months after living there, I noticed things missing. It was never anything big, like my laptop or Xbox, but my iPod and camera, and a couple of other small things vanished. I knew I just left them out in the open on the counter, but then they were gone. I figured I just misplaced them because, again, they were small items. A few times I'd get ready to leave, and my bottom lock would be locked. Now personally, I don't put much stock into doorknob locks. They've always seemed really flimsy to me, and not worth the effort, so I only ever used my deadbolt. When people would come over, I'd close the door behind them and automatically lock the deadbolt. It was a reflex. Even when I was home alone, the door was locked, but never the knob. I even felt safer using it, because the deadbolt had no keyhole on the outside of the door for someone to pick. 3 times the doorknob was locked when I went to leave the house, and even though I never used it, I rationalized that sure, I probably did lock it myself. I mean, what else could it be? One day, after living there for about 7 months, I'm sitting in my living room, and I hear some shuffling by my front door. Since my apartment was a one-bedroom and fairly small, I could hear it easily. I got up and moved closer, standing maybe 4 feet away from it. My heart sank as I watched my doorknob twist ever so slowly. It turned, then the door pushed in, stopped by my bedroom. At an antagonizingly slow pace, the person on the other side pulled it closed. The door softly clicked, and I watched and listened as they slid a key into my lock and locked the door. I didn't know what to do. Have you ever seen something that restarts your brain? It was so unfathomable that you can't just take in the information. That's what this was. I wish I could say I snuck up to the door and banged against it, scaring the crap out of whoever was on the other side. But I didn't. I didn't do anything, because my brain couldn't actually comprehend that someone with a key was trying to get into my apartment while I was home. The only thing that saved it was my dead one. And before anyone says it was a friend or my husband with a spare, I had the only 2 copies, I thought. Because my husband was deployed, not even family had a spare. Everything snapped into place after that. Someone had been sneaking into my apartment and stealing stuff, and doing God knows what while I was gone, and then relocking the door behind me. And they'd attempted to do it while I was there, locking my doorknob. I mean, how many times have they been in my apartment when I wasn't home? There's no way for me to know for sure, because like I said before, I can't lock the deadbolt from the outside. Logically, I knew it had to be someone who worked in the office, a maintenance man most likely. But since I didn't look through the peephole, I couldn't find out which of the 4 guys who worked there it was. About 6 months after moving out, a friend who still lived there told me that all of the maintenance men had been fired, because all of them were reported creeping around apartments and likely suspected of stealing. While this isn't outright terrifying like some of these other stories, it's still scary, at least to me. And it's another reminder to lock your doors, even when you're home. When I was a kid, my brother and I would get stuck with babysitting the neighbor's kid. His name was Alex. Alex was really fond of my Lego set that I had in the corner of my room, facing the window. He would play for hours, staying preoccupied, while my brother and I would play video games in the living room. So one night when I fell asleep on the couch while babysitting, my brother came by to me and said, "Alex is under your bed shaking." I asked, "What's wrong with him?" My brother told me to follow him to the room and try to talk him back out from under the bed. I go inside and find him on the verge of tears as he's trembling profusely under my bed. I asked him, "What's wrong? Why are you under there?" He whimpered, "Him," while looking at his sliding closet. As I walked towards the bed in order to help him out, he ran. He ran all the way back over to his house and waited on his front steps until his parents got home. Now, my parents were out to dinner with his, and he explained the whole story in detail to both his parents and mine. His explanation sent shivers down my spine when my brother and I left the house to meet up with his parents and find out what happened. My mum told me that Alex was playing with my Legos and heard a slight murmur from my closet, something that resembled a faint vocalization of, "Come here." He said that he looked behind him and noticed the closet had a slight opening with a light peering out from my lamp. He stared at the crack until he saw an eyelid open. He told us there was a man in the closet, and Alex then hid under the bed and he gave out a slight yell, which attracted my brother's attention. My family rushes back to my house, and in horror, we find my closet door rocked open and a few things missing. My window had been left open when it was previously closed. A few things had been knocked over which hadn't previously been touched. We still didn't know what force we were reckoning with after that event. Thank God, but nothing more severe happened. This story goes back 3 months or so. For background, my wife and I live in a gated community in the city of Chicago. Because of this, we see very few people in our neighborhood outside of fellow homeowners. We have an 8-year-old husky / German Shepherd mix who thinks he's more lapdog than guard dog. The only time he barks is at the 2 neighbors' dogs every day at 7:30 a.m., 1 p.m. and 10 p.m. as they walk out and back in the neighborhood. For whatever reason, he strongly dislikes those 2 dogs and angrily barks at them, despite years of us trying to get him to stop. Outside seeing those dogs, he's the most calm and friendly dog out there. Every so often, our dog will see or hear the occasional raccoon or possum on our back deck, and do a more excited and upbeat bark, the kind where he wants us to let him out to go snag some fresh city pets. This may happen 2 or 3 times a year. This brings us to August or September. I am awoken by my dog barking at the back door, and it does not sound like a familiar bark of his. This barking continues and becomes more intense. It has an urgency and a sound of peril I have not heard before from him. I look at my clock, and it's about 2:30 a.m. This is incredibly abnormal, and I begin to feel very uneasy. Our bedroom faces the back of our house, so I go to the window and glance out, down onto the deck. Living in the city, it's never fully dark out. This, combined with the glow from our kitchen and the cabinet lights we leave on as night lights, allow me to see a hooded man standing at my back door. His hands are at his sides, staring into my house, seemingly oblivious to the sounds of my dog, who is clearly frightened by it. He's not leaning towards the door, straining to see what's on the inside, as if trying to decide whether we're worth robbing. He's just standing there erect, with his hands straight down his sides. I grab my phone and go to the home app to turn on my outdoor string lights hung above the deck, which I have on a smart outlet. The lights come on, and the hooded man startles. He looks around to his sides and behind him, then runs off through my neighbor's yard, never to be seen again. This happened when I was about 12 to 13. During this time, my brother was diagnosed with cancer, so my mom was often at the hospital with him. She would randomly come home during the day to do laundry, pick up stuff, eat, and the like. At this time, my mother, brother, and I were also living at my grandparents' house. My grandparents have a 2-story house with a basement. There is a front door, and to the left, a staircase leading downstairs. The basement had 2 bedrooms, a living room, and a bathroom. When you entered the basement, you were immediately in the living room, which is where my mother slept. Then, you would go down a hall and find my room halfway down the hall, across from the bathroom, and my brother's room at the end of the hall. Sorry for the context. Anyway, one day I was extremely ill and stayed home sick. Both of my grandparents were at work, and my mother was at the hospital with my brother. I was laying in bed, sleeping, when I was woken up by a really loud stomping coming from upstairs. I assumed it was my mum, just coming home to get stuff, and was pissed she was running around like a lunatic. I sat up in bed to go upstairs to yell at her, but when I sat up, it felt like my brain had a heartbeat and was beating against my skull. So I just laid back down and went back to sleep. I'm not sure if this next part actually happened, or if I just think it did, because I was delusional from a fever. I swear, I kept hearing someone coming down the stairs, as our stairs were quite noisy. At the time, I slept with the TV in my room, so I thought the people/person kept hearing the TV and got freaked out. So I'd say maybe half an hour to an hour later, I woke up, forgetting the whole thing happened, and called my mum. She tells me to go upstairs and get some Dayquil to help me feel better. So I open my door, leaning upstairs, and it's just freezing. So I stop for a minute and think, that's weird. I slowly walk up my stairs, and my door is kicked wide open, and there's stuff everywhere. I immediately ran back downstairs and tried calling my mum, who of course didn't answer. So I call my grandma instead, and she tells me that I need to call the police. I called the police, and they told me to go wait on the driveway. So I did. And of course, as soon as the cops and I are talking, the school bus, taking all the people I went to school with, passed right by my house. As soon as my grandma got home, she gave me the biggest hug, and I just lost it. I think it was the first time since I pieced it all together, I finally felt safe again. They ended up taking portable DVD player, a Canon camera, and worst of it, all my great-grandmother's jewellery who had just passed away. I often think about what would have happened if I'd gone upstairs, and I don't think it would have been anything good. This happened maybe 6 years ago. I had just graduated college and was working at a little ad agency in the city. I was living in a cramped one-bedroom apartment with my unemployed girlfriend and my unemployed cat. It was a little 6-story building with maybe 20 apartments total just off Main Street. There was no security guard at the entrance of the building, but an automatically locking door that required a key code to enter. The 4th floor was home to a few students and couples, and my apartment was right next to a vacant studio, making it pretty quiet most of the time. After a long night in the office the night before, I didn't feel up for going into work, so I called out and turned off my alarm. I cuddled up to my girlfriend in hopes of sleeping till noon. At around 10 a.m., pounding on my front door woke both of us up, and I went to check it out. "Just a minute," I yelled, as I threw on a shirt and sweatpants, expecting a surprise visit from the maintenance man. In my groggy state, I couldn't really tell that anything was on, but I peeked through the peephole and didn't see anyone. Opening the door felt different somehow, and I immediately noticed a large depression in the wall 2 to 3 feet from my door. Looking down, I could see shards of wood that had broken free from the casing around the door, and I noticed the wood beginning to separate at the hinges. The hair on the back of my neck raised as I pieced together the scene. Someone had been trying to kick my door down and was pressing themselves against the wall for support. It scared us both for a while, and we slid a couch in front of the door before bed each night for a few months after that. I'm not sure what their intentions were that day, and we moved soon after. But I could never stop questioning what would have happened if they had heard my girlfriend's voice instead of mine. I live with my family in an extremely old house in the British countryside. For some background, it's your typical old English farmhouse. There's a big front door in the middle, and to your left you have your kitchen, and to your right your family room, with all the bedrooms upstairs. It was quite a nice space, and we had other buildings surrounding us that had been converted into spaces for us to use as children, that used to house pigs and other animals. However, those had been moved further afield, so that we can enjoy our privacy and not have to worry about any animals while we were just focusing on home. That's besides the point. This happened about 15 years ago, when I still lived with my family. I was the eldest of 4 girls, and we were all very content to sleep one night. It was your standard evening. All of us had gone to bed, and my parents were probably downstairs watching TV. I'm quite a light sleeper, and would always hear when they came up the stairs. And just like every night, I did this time as well. I found it a bit harder to go to sleep than usual. Something was pressing on my mind, so I told myself I needed to go grab a drink of water. I always made sure to go down the stairs carefully. Being a very old house, creaks are prevalent, and you have to know where to step exactly in order to make minimal to no sound. I got downstairs and just stared into the darkness through the kitchen window, while slowly taking sips of my water, contemplating and thinking about what I had to do tomorrow at school. I'm being very absent-minded, and I'm not really super tired, so I was just waiting for the water to hopefully make me feel full, and like I needed to go back to sleep. Just as I'm staring up, do I notice it? It's also worth mentioning at this point that no lights were on in the house, as we tried to be as energy efficient as possible, and it was a fairly bright moon outside, so it wasn't necessary in order for me to see where I was going in the kitchen. I see a figure begin to approach from the garden. Now I also need to point out, we live in the middle of nowhere, with no other houses around. I think the closest might be about a mile away, so very risky. We don't get along well with our neighbours, if you can even call them neighbours at that distance, so it was unlikely to be them. This person is making their way with haste towards the house, and I wonder what they want. I wait to see if they're even going to come to the house, or go up our driveway into the road, before I make a decision to wake up my mum, because I know she'll be pissed. I stand there in the dark, and the person arrives at the door, studying it, and walks around the house a little, looking at the windows and looking at the back door. He can't see me, at least I don't think he can. He hasn't noticed me at all. I didn't think I was standing somewhere particularly dark, and yet here I am, completely unnoticed. I don't really know what to do. Then he comes back around to the front door, and he pulls something off his back. It's black, shiny, and starts wedging it in. At that moment it all clicks. It's a crowbar, but I can't move. I'm frozen to my spot. He makes quick work of the door, gets in, and even though it's made a fair amount of noise, none of my family have woken up or done anything about it. He goes into the hallway, and I can no longer see him, and am paralyzed with fear, whether to shout for them to wake up, whether to run and hide in a safe spot and hope that he doesn't venture upstairs, or to do something reckless and announce my presence in the hopes that I scare him off. I choose option 4 and remain glued to the ground, paralyzed with fear and unable to move. Just as I start to get brave, I think the best thing to do would be to let him know I'm there and to hopefully scare him off. We have all of our kitchen knives in holders, so I just grabbed two that are conveniently in slots and start approaching the door slowly. I could see that he's made his way into our lounge, so I start approaching it ever so quietly, making sure to step where the creaks won't be heard, in order to jumpstart in the hopes that he leaves out of fear. I get right to the door and hide next to the wall, waiting for the opportunity. He's currently looking under the sofa and around our bookshelves in hopes to find something valuable. I stand there, panic-stricken, waiting for the right moment, when I see something that I can't explain. He's looking underneath the sofa. If he would have turned his head any more, I would have probably seen him, when a book flies off the shelf and lands to the floor with a thud. He visibly jumps, turns around, and another book flies off the shelf and lands on the floor. I wasn't really sure what I was seeing. Not only was there a strange man in my house, but now books are flying off the shelves too. One more book comes down and lands right between his legs. It's not before long that he grabs his bag and runs as quickly as he can out of the house. I don't even think he noticed me as he left, as I took a few steps back in anticipation for him leaving. He runs out, and the loud stomping woke up my mum. She comes bolting down, shotgun in hand, ready to shout at someone. She sees the open door, and in the moonlight, someone running through the field. She turns to me, turns to the man, and congratulates me on scaring him off, and asks what happened. I explained how I saw him coming, was frightened, then he made entry, and when he was just looking around our lounge, did books start fleeing themselves from the bookshelf, and that scared him off without me even having to announce my presence. My mother says that I should always shout, always make noise before they enter, to scare them off, and to tell her and my dad as the ever bigger priority. We call the police, and of course, nothing comes of it. I never find out who he was. But one burning question has always been left in my head. What happened? Was the house protecting itself? Is our house haunted? None of us had ever experienced anything remotely paranormal in the house. So I'm not really sure why, at that moment in time, did the house suddenly decide to develop a poltergeist that decided to leave just as quickly as well. Some things I'll never know the answer to, but I'm glad the house fought back, or whatever it was, to protect us from that home invader. I had awesome parents who let me sleep in the living room on weekend nights when I was very young, because my sister was a light sleeper and I could lay awake until dawn. But of course, I always end up sleeping on the couch, because Nick at night made me tired. So one night, I wake up to this prickly feeling, like an insect, just bolted into a sitting position, and I started staring out the window. We live in rural Georgia, so you can imagine the magnitude of trees in perfect light cast from the moon. I see a silhouette of someone in this tree. The family dog dashes to the window and is snarling into the glass. Terrified, I run into my parents' room and try to explain to my parents that there is a strange person outside. Dad grabs something defensive and darts outside with the dog to beat the wax off the hothead. I tremble in Mama's arms until Dad comes home and says he saw no one and goes to bed. I decide to sleep in my regular bed. I fill in my sister as to what happened. Dad is making regular sounds in the house with a cup of coffee, and we are still, and I finally think that I can sleep. Nope. I notice the man outside my window. From what I can see in the moonlight, he gives me a hush signal and runs away. just turns around and runs in a straight line away. I swear, I couldn't stop crying for what felt like hours. There were definitely a lot of sketchy things about the neighborhood I lived in. For instance, the previous resident of the house, which was next to mine, had died from overdosing on drugs. A meth house burnt down the road last year, and about 2 months ago, there was a shooting down the road at 2 a.m. And a week before, there was an attempted break-in at one of our neighbors. For some background, I was in a temporary house with my cousin and his wife and baby. I had my own little experience, but you'd need to know what his wife experienced to make it all the more creepier. So this starts off nearly a month ago, while me and my cousin were at work. His wife heard a knocking on the front door and assumed it was just my stepdad, who usually comes over by his voice. He has a key to the house, so just decides to let him open the key by himself. But he just kept knocking and asking if anyone was home. She started to get a bit worried and called my stepdad to see if it was him. It wasn't. He says our address and then states he's from Apple trying to deliver a package. The thing is, the closest Apple store is about an hour and a half away, and we hadn't ordered anything. He leaves after about 20 minutes, and then my stepdad comes over and takes her to his house. He suspected our neighbors were being watched by robbers, thinking about breaking in soon. But imagine if she decided to open the door. Nothing else happened, but we're still alone. Fast forward to this week. My cousin's family temporary stay is over, and they leave. So I'm feeling alone. I'm moving my things to my parents' home. I'm taking out some Amazon boxes to the garbage, and decide, with that sketchy encounter, I should probably scratch out my information on the box with my pocket knife. I flip open and start, but I hear a rustling in the woods. I look for a second, expecting nothing more than a squirrel or a loose dog that's always coming around. But I see a person in a white hoodie from what I guess would be about 25 feet away. The rustling stops, and I can't see them anymore due to the dense trees. I'm stunned for a few seconds. I'm the only one there, and I only have a pocket knife. I don't even run inside for some reason, I just casually move. Once I get inside, I stand on the edge, maybe being too scared to move. I think, what should I do? Call the cops? Call one of my parents? I just decided to call my stepdad, who luckily for me, was already on the way to the house to collect some stuff. He arrives 10 minutes later, and looks around and doesn't find anything, or anyone. I leave to work with all my valuables already in the car before this happened, and I'm definitely not going back alone for the rest of my things. Now I'm glad we're all out of that place. I'm hoping they don't decide to break in while nobody's home. But there really is nothing of value left, unless they want to steal my leftover clothes and blankets. The thought of having to live in fear, because some scum want to try and steal our stuff, irritates me. I hope we never meet. We grew up in a small Midwestern factory town. Snowy, freezing winters, and sweltering hot summers. My parents, mother, and stepdad barely made ends meet. We moved from trailer home to cramped apartment multiple times over. When I was in 4th grade, my family finally bought a house. Not just any house, an enormous house. The only problem was that the house was split into a triplex, meaning 3 families could live there in separate quarters. Since we were still dirt poor, my parents, of course, had to rent out 2 of the 3. This meant our family of 6 lived in a 2-bedroom shack section of the home. The second bedroom was really just a living room off the kitchen, which I shared with my sister and youngest brother. The door to our home was in the kitchen. My dog Pepe was a natural-born protector. He weighed about 10 pounds, but he didn't let anything past his sight without an alert. It's 3 a.m. on a 100-degree August night with 0 air conditioning. Windows with too many holes in the screens to leave open, as Midwest equals mosquitoes. Fans are running on full blast throughout the space, and I wake up to Pepe barking furiously at the end of my bed. At first, I just stared at him and asked him to be quiet, figuring that he had heard a noise from one of the neighbors. Then I hear a shuffle from the kitchen. I turned left and started to try and focus past the bright lights over the kitchen sink. Then I saw something move slightly, and upon meeting each other's gaze, they froze. There were 2 men standing in the kitchen. I will never forget their faces to this day. We just stared at each other for what felt like minutes. Pepe didn't back down, but he also wasn't about to leave his post at the end of my day. We had saved Pepe from an abusive home earlier that year in the freezing winter. He took his job pretty seriously. His bark was so loud, I couldn't even use to scream. My naked mother suddenly flies out of the bedroom next to us, screaming for 2 men. All that I remember is her scream, confrontation, and her chest swinging wildly in the bright glare from the kitchen light. The tallest man, at least 6 foot 5 inches, quietly looks at her and says, "Wrong house. Connects eyes with me," and they both turn and exit, never to be seen again. My parents decided after that we should start locking our doors. They justified the men by saying they were probably looking for the neighbors. They didn't call the police. I was probably 7 or 8 years old. As a sheer coincidence one night, my older sister's bed broke. I had a double bed, so my parents told us we had to share them. No big deal. Probably at around 2 a.m., my sister shakes me awake, saying she needed to go to the bath. I told her to go, and said something about, "Why did you wake me up?" She insisted that I go with her to watch the door. That was something we did when we were much younger and afraid of monsters. I again just told her to go and leave me alone. She started to physically drag me from the bed, so I finally caved in and walked with her, and I was pretty much sleepwalking and only woke up when I noticed she was walking right past the bathroom. I asked her where she was going, and she said, to Mum and Dad's room. Now I'm confused. We get to my Mum and Dad's bed, and she starts to wake up Mum. Mum was a super heavy sleeper, so it wasn't surprising when Dad woke up first, slightly annoyed. He asked her what was wrong. Very quiet, nonchalant. She says that someone crawled into bed with us. Dad sat up and had to ask what she meant, and she said, "Someone crawled into bed with us, Dad. I thought it was you, but it didn't smell like you." Dad immediately jumps up, grabs the revolver he kept under the bed, and heads to my room. I thought my sister was lying, until my dad flipped the light in my room on, and sure enough, there was a man laying in my bed. That woke me up. Dad put the barrel to his forehead and asked, "What the hell do you think you're doing in my son's bed? You better think real good about what you say next." The guy was clearly confused and looked like he was about to crap himself. He rubbed his eyes and started swearing to himself. By now my mother had called the cops, and the sirens were getting closer. Dad tells the guy to get up and to walk to the kitchen, all while at gunpoint. The cops arrest him and haul him away. Apparently, what happened was he was a high schooler who had attended a party a few blocks away. He got drunk and started walking to his grandma's house. Her house was north and he went south. He got to our house thinking it was hers, tried the locks, and got mad, thinking she had locked him out. He punched out the window in the back door, unlocked it from the inside, and made his way to his room to sleep it off. Thankfully, my parents were pretty cool and didn't crucify the kid. They made him pay for the door and requested he attend rehab, which he did. Still, not a great way to wake up. This incident happened at my dad's house a couple of years ago. Somewhat relevant to the story. My parents are still married, but live apart because of their work situations. They often see each other on weekends. My dad lives in a town of about 25,000, and it's pretty blue collar for the most part. His house is in the downtown area, which has been re-gentrified, so it's not a bad area to live in. But it's also just a stone's throw away from the worst part of town. My dad's house is also directly across the street from the main entrance to a university. So there is a university secure checkpoint just a few stops away from his front door that is manned by real police officers 24/7. My dad's house is older and has a detached garage at the back. His backyard is surrounded by a brick wall with 2 wrought iron gates, neither of which have a lock on them. Since everyone usually enters through the back door, it's really just inconvenient to have a padlock on the back gates that you constantly have to lock and unlock come rain or shine. The garage door can only be opened using a key code. Inside the back gate, on the side of the garage, is a small crawl-through space that was covered with a board at the time. We have no idea why this little weird space was put there, unless it once housed an AC unit for the previous owner's workshop in the garage. One weekend, my mum arrived as a visitor and was looking through the garage for some of her things she had stored there. She was particularly looking for a large floral duffel bag where she stored her sewing machine. Her sewing machine was still in the garage, but the floral duffel was nowhere to be found. She asked my dad where it was, assuming that he had used it as a suitcase, since he does often travel overnight occasionally for work. He told her that he hadn't touched it, and that it should still be in the garage where she left it. They both shrug it off, assuming that one of them had misplaced it and forgotten where it was. Fast forward a couple of weeks later. My mother is back to visit my dad, and I'm also there with my daughter. My dad walks out the back door one morning and notices the board on the little crawl-through space was damaged, as if someone had been kicking it in. He decided to go into the garage to investigate. Soon after, he called my mum and I into the garage to see what he had found. There was a piece of rolled-up newspaper that was charred black on one end. Someone had opened the back gate at night, kicked in the board over the crawl-through space, and lit a piece of newspaper on fire to use as a torch, as they glanced around the garage for, presumably, anything valuable. And the freaky part, they did all of this within 100 meters of a police security checkpoint, while all 4 of us were sleeping just outside the back door. And we were lucky they didn't find the spare house key hung on a nail inside the garage. My dad put 2 and 2 together and realized that this was probably the burglar's second entrance into the garage. A couple of weeks before, when my mum's floral duffel bag disappeared, my dad had noticed that the board covering the crawl-through space seemed loose, and had taken steps to tack it from the inside. He assumed that the burglar originally entered through the same space and stole the duffel bag, either planning to use it to store items that he would steal from other houses, or use it upon his return to my dad's garage a couple of weeks later to gather items of value. Perhaps he was spooked the first time and ran off. After the second incident, my dad had thicker boards nailed to the inside and outside of the crawl space. It remained untouched ever since. But to this day, my mum always thinks twice before opening that garage door when it's dark out. And my dad keeps a baseball bat right next to the back door. We're just glad the guy's makeshift newspaper torch didn't provide him enough light to find the spare house key and enter while we were asleep in our beds that night. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's video. A huge and massive special thank you to my incredible patrons for supporting me on Patreon. Your help makes a huge difference, and I really appreciate it. If you'd like your name on screen, as well as a few fancy perks on Reddit and Discord, feel free to check out my Patreon, which you'll be able to find in the description, and it makes a huge difference to me. And even if you don't, thanks for listening about it. If you enjoyed the video, it'd be pretty cool to drop a like and leave a comment with your thoughts, as that always helps. And if you're new here, why not subscribe and press the little bell icon to be notified each time I post nightly spooks. If there's a story that you would like read, feel free to post it to my Reddit, or alternatively send it to my email. Just please be sure to include plenty of detail, good grammar and punctuation to ensure your story will be selected. But anyway, for now guys, it's time for me to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.
Mortis Media.
Good evening all, and welcome. Before the video begins, I would just like to announce that I have released a new video on my second channel. It's pertaining to the unboxing of a certain loot crate. Now, if you've never heard about it, I do Harry Potter content over on my second channel. And it would really mean a lot to me, even if you don't intend on sticking around, if you could just show me a bit of support and check out my latest video over on that channel. It really helps me out. But even if you don't, that's cool too. I'll leave the link in the description nonetheless. But without further ado, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I was riding around on my bike in winter, looking for places to explore. My hometown was a big industrial East Coast city, known for their brass manufacturing. In the southern portion of this city, there were lots of factories, and where there are factories, there are houses for the workers. Across the street from a brass works I had visited dozens of times, I noticed a house that was very vacant and obviously abandoned. It was 3 stories tall, with asphalt siding, shingles coloured in a deep red, brown beige, colours that screamed 1970s. The first 2 floors had every window busted out, and even had the sash weight from the windows ripped out and scavenged for the scrap iron. But the 3rd floor, all the windows were intact. Intrigued, I made my way into the building. Very easy to do. Not only were there no windows, there were no back doors either. Only the front door remained. Walking through the building was not easy though, because the entire apartment was covered waist deep in garbage bags. Eventually I made my way to the stairwell and got up to the 2nd floor. I was met with the same situation. The entire apartment filled with garbage. I worked my way up to the back porches, where there are usually stairs connecting all 3 floors. This proved to be the case, and I wound up my way to the 3rd floor porch. When I got up there, I tried the door, and found that it was locked. But as soon as I looked away from the door, I saw that someone had taken a heavy-duty orange extension cord and grafted it to the power lines coming from the nearby telephone poles. The cord had obviously been there a while, because the part of the cord that was exposed to the sun had bleached a pale yellow. The rest of the dingy orange cord went into the house through a hole drilled in the wall. So I thought to myself, okay, this place might have power. Interesting. Since I couldn't open the back door, I went back to the 2nd floor apartment and waded through the trash until I found the stairs to the 3rd floor, the front of the building. I followed the stairs up, and as I approached the door, I started to feel that something wasn't right. It was warm, not just because I was out of the winter wind and in an enclosed space. It was full. It was physically warm. I approached the door and turned the knob slowly with my gloved hand. I made no noise, but it turned completely. As I slowly pushed the door open, as quietly as I could, I was hit with a blast of heat that fogged up my glasses. Inside the cracked open door, I could see that there was indeed power. As I opened the door the rest of the way, I found myself in a kitchen with eaten food on the table, used and a still smoking cigarette in a cup, and a gas kitchen stove with all 4 burners on high. That explains the heat. I stood in the middle of the kitchen and looked around. Since it was an attic apartment, it was very small. The kitchen was no more than 10 by 10, and because of the staircase leading into it, the room was shaped like an L. There was a living room off the side that was dark, a single bathroom, and to my left towards the front of the house was a single bedroom. It was there that I heard sounds. People talking. I stood still in the doorway listening for a minute, until I realized that I was hearing Judge Judy. I worked my way towards the bedroom and could see the television playing in the corner through the partly opened doorway. When I reached the doorway, I opened it slightly and looked to the side, ready to run if I saw someone in there. I didn't, but what I saw was kind of worse. The bedroom was barely larger than the bed it was in. The television was crammed into the corner, stacked on top of some milk crates. There were some damaged computer speakers and other electricals that could tell had been salvaged from the dumpster behind Office Max. Being somewhat of a veteran dumpster diver myself, there were more than one set of speakers. Some even had subwoofers with them. But there was also an old VCR stacked inside the crates, with cables going both into the TV and into the other corner of the room. I followed the cables and found more crates filled with camera batteries and chargers, and an old TEAC CD/DVD duplicator. And on top of the top crate was a semi-bent tripod. Things were starting to click at this point, but turning back to the bed clenched it for me. The bed had no blankets, only a single pillow and a bedsheet on a mattress, a sheet that had red splotches towards the center of it. As I turned to start heading back, I noticed handcuffs hanging off the bedpost. That was it. I walked as quietly but as quickly as possible back down the stairwell, and instead of going through the apartments below again, I took it straight down to the bottom floor, where I found the front door unlocked. I got out of there as fast as I could, took my bike, and rode off with a sigh of relief. 3 months later, the house burnt down. A buddy of mine and I were exploring an old factory that was shut down for poisoning the water supply in the area 30 years before. The area was contaminated with lead, and the factory was left pretty much unchanged aside from being practically gutted of machines. Inside the maintenance/locker room area, there was a long hallway with doors and various rooms. It was pitch black inside, even in broad daylight. We navigated the corridors with flashlights, and the air smelled of mold and felt cold and damp. But the ground was dry and dusty. The lead paint was peeling off the ceiling. The thick flakes of paint looked like the room had been feathered. A lot of the flakes had fallen and were littering the floor, and they made a satisfying crunch as we crept through. Inside one of the rooms, there was a sliver of light bleeding out of an old double door and spilling into the hallway. Naturally, this caught our attention as we eased inside. The light turned out to be sunlight as these doors led outside. The room was their laundry room. I assume it was for uniforms. There was a huge dryer still in there that we ventured one of us could fit in. I volunteered and climbed in. To my surprise, it still spun freely as the bearings had remained in good health throughout the years. I braced myself and told my buddy to try and spin it. I wagered I could survive a few revolutions unscathed. We spent a few minutes taking turns spinning around in the big dryer. Being teenagers, this was as much fun as we'd hoped for in this creepy old factory. My turn had come around again, and just as I had begun to rock back and forth gaining momentum, I looked to my buddy for the extra push, but he didn't help. His demeanor instantly changed and he was pale, almost shaking like he'd seen a ghost. "Shh," he whispered in a panic. "What's the matter? Listen. Do you hear that?" I hurried up the dryer before coming to complete silence and lending an ear. From the pitch-black corridor comes a familiar sound from only moments ago. Crunch, crunch, crunch. It was the paint chips on the ground getting crunched very slowly. Someone, or something, was creeping towards us in the pitch-black catacomb-like hallways of this decrepit factory. We'd been everywhere in the factory, and not a soul or even a small animal was to be seen. The footsteps did not slow down or speed up, but they were getting louder, and we both looked at each other in disbelief and utter terror. Who could this be? What could this be? Why are they sneaking up on a cacophony of creaking dryers and laughter in the pitch-black unknown? There was no time to entertain these questions. I turned to the double doors from where the sunlight was leaking and heaved myself onto them. They gave out an awful noise amidst the temporary silence and crackled off paint but didn't budge. My buddy joined in, and finally they began giving way. We resorted to kicking them for the final blow, and they burst open. I'd never been so happy to see sunlight, dead grass, and rusty fences in my life. We bolted, never looking back, never going back, and never knowing what we would have encountered in that wretched, dark, and creepy corridor. I live in a pretty sizable town near a major city. In my town, there's train tracks that are still pretty active to this day, that I still wait on my way home. Anyway, there's a part where the highway in my town and the railroad intersect, and near there is an abandoned prison. It's been there before I was ever born, but pretty much out of sight, and not many people knew about it. My friends knew about it, because one of them was active in urban exploration, and has explored abandoned factories and buildings of this sort in the major cities near our town. So, when he heard there was a place we can explore right here in our town, we jumped at the opportunity and decided to go with a team of 3. Me, a childhood friend, and the urban explorer. It was my first time going on something like this, and I was pretty excited. But when I found out how to get there, it was pretty sketchy. See, the railroad that's near that prison is also near a neighborhood that was made with a fairly new development at around 2010. To get to the prison, we had to park in the cul-de-sac of this neighborhood and walk past a ditch, a flat area of undeveloped land. There's a ton of high grass obstructing the dirt road to the prison, but it was evident that there was indeed a path because of multiple no trespassing signs in the line, warning us not to go in. We ignored these signs and walked the path for what seemed like 2 miles. After the path, there was just flat land, and we could see a concrete road extending out to greet us, but still short by a couple of yards. When we got into the main part of the prison, I saw an overgrown greenhouse that was maybe used to store things, some guard towers with barbed wire around them, and smaller houses that I think may have been used as classrooms or infirmaries perhaps. We decided to explore different houses one by one, starting with the classroom. It was gutted of all furniture, but had a blackboard with names written on it. Seeing those names gave me chills that never left me the entire time I was there. But what sealed the deal was the storage room in the back. I never said anything to my friends at the time, but I felt as if something was there looking back. Yet I couldn't see it, because there was no light, as we left for the prison in the late afternoon. Considering the walk it took to get there, we started exploring near night. It gave me the creeps, and I stayed outside while they decided to explore. But those names on the board wouldn't get out of my head, and it made the feeling more authentically knowing that there were people at one point. If they were alive or dead, God only knows. We ventured further into the prison yard and found that we were surrounded by small brick houses with furniture thrown out front. Going into them, we found much of the same. Broken glass, graffiti, drawers full of documents with names and other personal information. The most interesting thing we found were the firecrackers and fast food wrappers. But as interesting as it was equally disturbing because it showed us signs that people had been here recently. All I could hope for is that they had the same intent as us. Now all of this was normal, up to the point that something struck a chord with me. In a small house we explored, there was a broken tile on the floor, and peeking out of it was a document. I picked it up and thought nothing of it at the time, but when I put it back down and walked out the house, the energy of that place felt odd. It's something that happened to me before, and I can't convince you to believe me, but you have to take my word. But sometimes when I interact with items, I get weird feelings about them. It happened to me with my family keepsake, and the same thing happened in this instance. The way I can describe it is that it's a feeling of melancholy. Something sad happened here, but also I feel that it is not intending ill will. Whatever it is, it allowed us to keep exploring as long as we intended to keep things as they are, and it actually wants the story to be heard. The prison shouldn't be kept so hidden, as actions are needed to either take or preserve the story of it, or put it to better use. I didn't say anything to my friends, because I wanted to keep the adventure light-hearted, but they obviously knew I was being reserved after that. I was trying to be respectful of the energy there, because I knew the minute someone screwed around, that this energy would snap. It was getting pretty late at this point, and all that was left to explore was the prison building itself. The main hall wasn't interesting, pretty much gutted of all furniture and empty rooms. But it did have the original wood intact, which is cool to see. Walking further down, there was a hall with the local government logo from decades ago. But at least, that's what I think, because it looked drastically different from what country it is. The striking part was that I swear that there was a gang graffitied on the wall, from pretty big gangs that are commonplace in the US and parts of South America. I thought it wasn't too strange, but after all, this place was secluded and pretty much anything could go down here. But it also meant that at any point people could show up, and who knows what might happen next. Next to the graffiti was probably the thing that scared me the most, a detailed pentagram. While saying this, I have found pictures of the walls that people had taken recently. The pentagram wasn't among the graffiti. I wouldn't be surprised if a ritual went down here, but at this point I'm hoping it wasn't a sacrifice or spell or anything. We reached the end of the hall and was stopped by a locked bar door. You know, like one of those old Western movie type ones? Well, my urban explorer friend, being the idiot he is, handed me the camera and said, "Take a pic of me pretending to be stuck behind bars. It'll be funny." And right when he stepped to pull the bars and position his face, a loud crash reverberated from the prison. A giant glass window shattered from deeper in, and we couldn't necessarily see it, because the door was locked. Not like they were trying to investigate it anyway. At that point, I felt the energy again. It wasn't mad, but definitely felt as if the peace wasn't the same. Maybe it was mad at my friend. Pretty much mocked the prisoners that used to live here, and the names of the people on the documents, and the names on the blackboard, and all of that. But I felt no ill will towards me. I just felt like whatever protection we were given before, we had lost it now. And all I could mutter was, "Let's go, guys. I don't feel safe." And we'd left. Walking back on the beaten path, I felt as though there was something seeing us out of the prison, waiting for us to leave. But when I looked back, I saw nothing. The whole feeling washed over me again. Melancholy, sadness, as if to say the energy wanted me to not completely abandon it. We got back to the car, and I recalled what I felt to my friends, but they didn't believe it. And they recounted how cool it was to see old documents and equipments used in prisons. But for me, I was relaxed, kinda. My mum likes museums a lot, but that one required respect for the exhibits being displayed. That night, I decided to look deeper into the story of the prison and take a quick Google search, which auto-corrected my initial query with haunted prison. Well, there you have it. There was a Wikipedia page that also gave more background info on the person. It turned out the story was way deeper than I thought. The prisoner here was mainly African American. It was opened in 1909, during a time when Reconstruction affected much of the US. Some federal worker was conducting an excavation and found a human bone that was not recent, and it led to a burial ground with more than 95 bodies. To this day, I have never felt so excited and frightened at the same time in my life as I did on the night me and my friends decided to visit a huge abandoned asylum. A few years ago, I was still a student at Newcastle University. Life was great, as me and my friends could pretty much do exactly what we wanted, and when we wanted. So this story started when a friend of mine had got a bit bored and had come across this abandoned mental asylum online. Situated in Mortis, St. George's Asylum was a classic Victorian-looking asylum with huge, extensive mazes of corridors and creepy rooms. There was a huge tower which loomed over the asylum, and it could be seen for miles, climbing out of a large forest at the top of the hill. God knows what had actually gone on in that place, but I am glad I only visited it as a curious student and not a patient. So one day after university, me and my friends had planned to go to Mortis to check out the asylum for ourselves. We knew that a lot of it had already been demolished, and that development works were already being undertaken. However, this did not stop us, as I knew a significantly large area remained abandoned, and I had convinced everyone it would be worth it. Around 7 p.m, 3 of us set off to the train station. It was a short but pleasant train journey, as we could see Newcastle disappear behind us, and the view became increasingly countrified. As we arrived to Mortis, we decided to grab some beers and wait until dusk before we made our entry. We had to walk out of the little town for about a mile before we saw a slip road surrounded by forests on either side. After a long climb up a very steep hill, we had arrived and finally seen what we had come for. This place was huge. The battered red brick complex of buildings were all interconnected and were surrounded by high metal fences. On these fences, I had noticed the severe warnings and patrol dog signs that were hanging on almost every available place along the fence perimeter. The asylum stood shamefully as it was being demolished by some development company, but we had spotted an access point about 100 meters away. We sat for a while in a nearby field and drank our beers until we picked up the courage to attempt an entry just as it was turning dark. We walked the perimeter until we found a gap in the fence, and without warning, we all sporadically just climbed through it and made sprint through the 100-meter gap between us and the asylum. We were heading for the smashed-out door that was clearly visible. We ran the distance as quickly as we could, through mud holes and piles of rubble, until we reached the opening and clambered through and up into the asylum. Looking back now, I realized that we had entered at a point which leads straight into the heart of the complex. The place was an absolute mess, with smashed cups and documents everywhere. Chairs stood alone facing back walls in rooms, and we could see where patients would have been living. The corridors were arched and went on for as far as the eye could see in almost every direction on the bottom floor. In some ways, it was a shame because we knew that if we had gone about a year beforehand, there would have still been more than double what was currently left. Anyway, we continued to explore the labyrinth of corridors and rooms, but at the same time, we were beginning to get a little too comfortable. We had begun flashing our phones for pictures and making a fair amount of commotion. After a good 40 minutes of wandering, we decided we needed to go in order to catch the last train back. We were about to leave through the door we had entered through, and my friend noticed a light, which I thought was coming from my other friend's flashlight. My mate immediately told my other mate to turn off his flashlight. It was at this exact point that our hearts began to sink to the bottom of our chests. When my friend turned off his, there was still a light coming from the end of the corridor. We were not alone. We decided to make a run for the nearest stairway and wait until the light went away. We all were absolutely crapping ourselves at this point, as the light was scanning across the corridor and was no further than 10 meters from us, right at the open entrance where we needed to go. I could barely breathe, as I knew people had been caught by patrol dogs at this place before. We stood there for 10 minutes, absolutely frozen. For whatever reason that night, the light stopped scanning and it began to fade away. If it was a security guard, we all knew that he had definitely seen us and had most likely decided not to pursue us. If we were scared, I could not imagine what the security guard must have been thinking or feeling. In a hospital of that size and state, I would be absolutely terrified to patrol it on my own. Shortly after the light had faded, one of my friends decided to make a run for it. Me and my other mate followed and made the 100-meter dash across the open land back to the safety of the outer fence. We could not see the flashlight anywhere, but I'm almost certain it was a security guard who could have had a massive patrol dog by his side. We did not look back and got the hell out of the fenced perimeter. Inconveniently, my friend had dropped his phone while running in the asylum, so we had to go back to the grounds to find it. He quickly found it, and we began to jog back to the station. We were all ecstatic, and did not stop talking about it for the next 3 days. It was by far the most excited and lucky I had ever felt in my entire time at university. Who knows what would have happened had we been caught. I am a 20-year-old male from a town called Doncaster in the UK. This story happened a couple of weeks ago, when I had recently got into an activity called urban exploring, which, for those of you who don't know, is basically just exploring abandoned facilities and taking photos. This story took place on my first real experience of urban exploring. I had been looking on the web for places near me, as I didn't want to go far, as I was going to be doing it alone. After an hour or two of searching, I had found the perfect location. An abandoned mansion only a few minutes away called Ivy Manor Farm, which I was frankly surprised I'd never heard of before. A little backstory to the home. It was occupied until the late 1900s. I think it was owned by a male psychiatrist who departed the mansion after a foul spell in his career, after releasing a woman whom he believed to be sane. However, upon release, she stabbed and killed a girl in the local town. The backlash caused the owner to just leave the mansion intact to escape from prison. I'm not 100% sure about the details, but if you Google Ivy Manor Farm Hampole, I'm sure you'll be able to find the details yourself. Anyway, I decided I would go the following day, as by the time I had found the location, it was already pretty late, and I was tired. The next day, I decided I would go to the mansion at dusk, as the mansion is located alongside a main road, and I wasn't 100% sure on the laws of urban exploring. Around 7 p.m, I decided I would start the journey to the house. It was only a 15-minute drive, so I knew I would get there while it was still a bit light in the sky. About halfway through my journey while listening to the local radio, the heavens opened and the rain began to bounce off the ground. I just hoped the building still had a functioning roof. I pulled up to the mansion on time at around 7:15. Due to the rain, it was cast, and the plan of getting here during light was out the window. I pulled around the corner, and my car was out of sight from the main road. I sat in there for about 5 minutes hoping the rain would pass, but I had no such luck. The rain continued to fall, and I decided to brave the elements and get out of my car. I put my hood up and made my way around the corner to the house. As I got in front of the house, a convoy of cars made its way past, so I decided to wait until the last one, and then I jumped the fence, as I'm quite a paranoid person. I entered the house through the front door. The fixtures and fittings were old and broken, both due to natural causes and local kids, due to the numerous tags and graffiti that littered the walls. I decided to work my way from top to bottom, and I made my way up the cobblestone stairs and turned left, as the corridor to the right didn't look too stable. I entered a room that had a creepy feel to it, but I couldn't put my finger on what gave me this feeling. But I just marked it down to the fact it was the unknown age that gave me the feeling. The one weird thing I found about the roof is that it looked perfectly plastered and untouched, to say how long it had been derelict. I didn't want to go too far into the room, as I wasn't sure if the floors were stable. So, slightly disappointed to the lack of interesting fixtures, I made my way downstairs to the rest of the house. It was pretty bland apart from the back of the house, as there was an abandoned swimming pool that was full of vegetation and rats. It almost looked like a scale model of a rainforest, and while deep in concentration of taking photos of the pool, a rhythmic and continuous sound came from the inside, and a feeling of what I can only describe as utter dread washed over me. The primal instinct of fight or flight came over me, and me, being a 6'2" stocky male, I chose to get the hell out of there, despite me not being able to find the car which I had seen on the internet. I made my way through the maze-like rooms until I reached the kitchen, when a sound started to accompany the clicking sound. It was laughing, but not your average laughing, but some psycho straight out of a movie type laughing. I started choking up, holding back tears, and looking down the doorway leading to the main room where the door was located. I could see a warm glow, and was both terrified and intrigued. I reluctantly edged round the corner through a small gap in the floor, and it was the only room I hadn't been to in the basement. Through the gap, I could see a single tea-light candle flickering in the cool breeze that whistled through the house. Slightly relieved, as the house had now fallen quiet, I crouched down to see what was through the hole, and my blood ran cold, as in the cellar there was a man in nothing but a bathing costume, staring at the now dying candle. I jumped back and knocked an old gas canister, and suddenly the man span towards the stairway up to the room. It was at that moment that the candle must have gone out, from what must have been the air, as how fast the man span, and the house fell into darkness. I slowly made my way up, trying to make as little noise as possible, when suddenly I heard the chair fall over with force in the cellar. I bolted through the door and over the fence. Once over, I shot around the corner, got into my car and looked at the mirrors. I hadn't been followed. I was safe. So I started the car and pulled to the end of the road. Curious and somewhat stupid, I decided to turn left, which would lead me back to the front of the building. As I drive by, my hair stood on end, as there was a man in the doorway just waving. However, the worst thing was I also saw 2 men in the upstairs window leading to the room that I explored by myself. I really hope to not encounter those chaps again. I am a 24-year-old male who was born and raised in northern New England. I grew up hearing all the scary stories and urban legends that haunted my dreams. But there was one local legend that everyone in my high school knew about. Monkey Town. Monkey Town was supposed to be a Christian retreat camp. You'd have to take this road in between a funeral home and a cemetery, down a big hill, and you'd enter what would look like this set from The Village, 2004. It was a big circle of old-style houses, with a big white church in the middle. I'll describe it a bit more later in the story, but it was always a dare to see how far you could walk down into the camp without chickening out. I remember a couple of times in middle school, a few friends and I made it halfway down the hill and chickened out. The year was 2011. It was junior year. I had just gotten my license on my first car, a classic Chevy Blazer. One night I was driving around with 2 friends, one who went to the same high school as me, and one who did not, Bessie and Kale. Bessie and I thought it might be fun to take Kale down to Monkey Town and see what happens. So the 3 of us hopped into my Blazer, and there we went. I remember putting on some of the instrumental music from Halloween to set the mood, and how dumb was I? As we got down the hill, mind you, we were in my car the entire time, we made our way around the circle, mesmerized by the entire community separated from society. One thing that stuck out was this red light at the top of the church steeple. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. That's when I remember thinking, no way. I quickly turned my head to my left, and I see a giant man in overalls running at full speed towards my car. The messed up part about this is that the man was carrying a bat or tool of some kind. I slammed on the gas, and we got the hell out of there. The 3 of us couldn't believe what had just happened. I'm pretty sure we just went back to my house to recover from the scare. We passed out, and all was well. The next day I was chilling with another friend James and his girlfriend Sadie. I had told them about last night's events, and they were sure as hell didn't buy it. Me, a 17-year-old teenage boy, wanted to prove them wrong. So we all jumped into my Blazer and headed back to Monkey Town. This time my Blazer was full. We'd picked up 2 other girls who, coincidentally, had the same name, and another buddy of mine, Joe. I made James drive my Blazer as I sat shotgun. As we all headed down, the tension rose. We got halfway around the circle until one of the girls started screaming. This time, there were at least 5 men running at the car, and 3 of them definitely had weapons. James didn't know what to do. It's like he was frozen. The men were yelling at us to get out of the car. They were legitimately shaking my car back and forth, and I remember being crouched down so far in the seat as if that did anything. Finally, James slammed on the gas and peeled out of there. As I began taking all my friends home, I got a call from my mother. Apparently, 2 police officers were in my kitchen. One of the Monkey Town civilians had called the police and told them we tried to run them over. What bullcrap? I was furious. We raced home to my house to explain to the officers what actually happened. All in all, the cops really didn't have too much interest. No crime was committed. And to this day, I can't help but think what would have happened if we would have gotten out of the car. What kind of Christian retreat camp is that? Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope that you did enjoy tonight's stories. For all of those of you who applied to become moderators, I'm going to reply tomorrow probably, just to give the rest of you guys a little bit of time to catch up. If you haven't already and you'd like to become a moderator, feel free to drop me an email. Just make sure you say comment moderator in the email subject line and explain why you want to become a comment moderator. I did say yesterday why we needed some, so if you haven't heard that, skip to the end of yesterday's video and find out. So yeah, if you'd like to, just be sure to do that, and I'll get back to you guys tomorrow. Also, it would really mean a lot to me if you guys could check out my video on my other channel. Yeah, I'd really appreciate it. It is at the top of the description. So yeah, I hope that you do. It also includes a face reveal for me and for Pandora if you haven't seen that already. But anyway, for now guys, I'm going to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. Good evening all, and welcome. As a special treat, tonight we have an extra long episode of Let's Not Stories. So you best be sitting comfortably, as it's time to let the darkness take control. I am a 27-year-old girl, and even though this story happened almost 20 years ago, I still think back to it every year around this time. I was a 9-year-old girl in 4th grade, and it was Valentine's Day. We had spent the week decorating our class door for the yearly competition and making a big card for our principal/vice principal, and other office staff signed by all of our class, and our entry and invitation to come see our theme decorated door. I don't remember how this part came about, but I was the one to walk downstairs to the office